started. So the first thing we're gonna do, I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about roux. So that's the first thing you're gonna wanna use when you're making a traditional gumbo. Now, what a roux is, it's 1 part fat and 1 part flour, and those are the same parts by weight. Usually it's butter, but I'm using vegetable oil today because that's a little bit better for your arteries because it's liquid at room temperature. Traditionally, we use, get this started. Traditionally, we use a white flour, but this time I'm going to use whole wheat flour just because it's a little bit better for you. It has a lot more fiber, and that means it's going to keep you fuller longer. It won't spike your sugar. You won't be hungry a few hours later. It's just really good for you. Louder? Okay, I'll speak louder. So what you want to do with your roux is just add your fat and your flour to the pan, and then you're going to stir it until basically it makes a paste. And there are different levels of roux, so starting from very basic, so that's like the blonde, you're just mixing the fat and the flour together, all the way up until the chocolate roux, which is when you're cooking it for like 30 to 40 minutes until it turns to the color of chocolate. And that's gonna provide you thickening in your soup, and it's also gonna impart a lot of flavor. So I prefer to make my gumbo with a chocolate roux. Because we don't have time, I'm going to move on. So basically you would do the paste and just keep cooking it until it's the desired color you want. So we're gonna put that aside and pretend we made chocolate roux. Okay, so let's start actually making the gumbo. So because we want to be healthy, we're going to try to use as little fat and as little salt as possible in this recipe, and we're going to build flavor so that we're not just adding a ton of salt. So you want to start with, in this case, because this isn't a vegan meal, you want to start with your meats because that's going to help to flavor your vegetables, which is going to help to flavor everything else, basically. And that's kind of how we build flavors, and you season as you go. So I'm starting with a chicken andouille sausage. And I did this just because I know a lot of people don't eat pork. I found this at Renton. But this is a traditional sausage that's used in a gumbo. So we're gonna put that in and let that heat up in the pan. So what we're doing here is we're allowing the sausage to brown. And as it browns, it's gonna release some of the fat that's in it, and it's also going to build some brown bits on the bottom of the pan, and that's also adding a lot of flavor, which is gonna flavor the next step of what we're doing. So let's let this brown for a little bit. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, cool. So, does anyone have any questions while we're waiting for this? I found this one at Renton. But I also like to go, if I'm doing traditional New Orleans style or Louisiana style food, I like to go to AARTH in downtown Kent. It's Black owned as well, and they do have everything basically shipped in from Louisiana, so it's pretty good. They also have a deli, and they have all kinds of great food back there as well. AARTH, A-L-T-H-A. So, and I'm going to go a little bit quickly for the sake of time, but gumbo is traditionally a meal that you want to let cook and, build flavor low and slow. So I'm going to show you the technique, and then when you get home, you can take your time and make it. So the chicken sausage is starting to brown on the bottom. So we'll give it a few more minutes. And while that's happening, I'm going to go ahead and add my chicken. So this is boneless, skinless chicken breast. Usually I prefer to use chicken thighs, but since we're trying to be healthy, we're going to try to get as much just straight protein without all the added fat and stuff. So to help move this along, because it can get dry quickly, I'm adding just 2 teaspoons of the same canola oil I use for the roux. And that's going to help me get a little bit of juice in the pan so that it doesn't stick. So you can just scoop your sausage over and add your chicken. And that'll start to brown as well. And we don't need to fully cook all of this stuff right now because we're going to add everything back later and let it, all the flavors get to know each other, as my dad would say. So here's where I'm going to add a little bit of seasoning. What I'm using right now is our all-purpose seasoning called Taste Tutor Seasoning 101. It's basically a seasoned salt, but if you're going to use salt, you want to use a little bit less just because the sodium content is a little higher. So I'm going to do 1 teaspoon for the chicken and then 1 teaspoon for the shrimp. So I'll only use half of this. Okay.
Excuse me. What did you say?
So we've got chicken in the pan, and let me see if I can show you guys the brown stuff. So there's the brown stuff happening at the bottom, and you might think stuff is burning, but it's not. We're going to be able to get those things picked up from adding the vegetables later. And you don't want to get rid of that because it's all flavor. Yes, ma'am. The seasonings are available online. They're packaged in glass bottles, and we ship all over the country. Yes, you have 2 of the flavor packs. Yeah. Oh.
I was just asking what was the name of the seasoning that you use?
Oh, it's called Taste Tutor Seasoning 101. So it's like, when you go to class and you have the 101 class and then the 102 class, it's like that, because it's the tutor. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so the chicken is starting to brown. We're getting some nice color on that. Sometimes I have to leave it alone because my favorite thing is stirring, but I stir too. So while the chicken is browning, we can go ahead and add our shrimp. This is just, I've used frozen shrimp, you can use fresh shrimp. The technology with frozen seafood is really good right now, so the quality is pretty much similar. But always try to get wild caught, not farm raised. Okay, so we're gonna add our shrimp. And if you want to be real authentic, you would use Gulf shrimp. And then we're going to add the rest of our Taste Tutor seasoning into the pot. And the shrimp only need to just turn pink. You don't need to cook them that long because the longer they cook, before they get into the broth, they're going to get all chewy and tough and weird. So because they'll be sitting in the broth a little bit longer, I'm going to go through sciencey here. What happens is the moisture from inside the shrimp leaches out into the broth, and then it enters back into the shrimp. So the longer you cook things, just all kinds of meat, that's why they get tender. The longer you cook them, because it's the process of letting the juices flow out and then it's being reabsorbed back in, basically. All right. So let the shrimp turn pink, and then some of the brown stuff is also coming up because the shrimp were a little wet. And we haven't added any more oil, so it's not super fatty, which is okay. Good fats are okay, but just want to try to, do everything in moderation. Okay. So while that's heating up, I'll talk to you a little bit about the accompaniments that people typically eat with gumbo. Usually it's like a little bit of white rice or something like that. The reason we're using brown rice is a similar reason to why we're using the whole wheat flour, because it has more fiber. You're getting all of the grain and all of the nutrients from the grain, which is more beneficial for you. It keeps you fuller longer. Your blood sugar, again, doesn't spike. And if you cook it properly, you know, it can be just as soft as a white rice would be. Okay. So let's move on to the next step. Let me I'm going to take this out. We're going to transfer all of our meats into a separate container, and you always want to make sure when you're working with meat, you never put the cooked meat back in the raw thing. So we're going to do that. So basically all this is par cooked at this point. All right, and we've got the brown on the bottom here. And this is my favorite pot because it's yellow, which is my favorite color. And I went on just a random trip to New Mexico with one of my friends, and we ran across the Le Creuset outlet store. I didn't even know that was a thing. But these were so on sale, I was like, whoa, I've never seen that before. So I went ahead and got one. So this is my baby. So now we're not adding any more oil. We're just going to go ahead and add the vegetables, and the water leaching out from the vegetables is going to bring up the goods on the bottom here. So I've got onions and green pepper, and then celery. And I always like to add, for healthy vegetable or healthy meals, I like to add more vegetables than the recipe calls for, just because it can't hurt, you know. Vegetables are good for you. And then I'm sure a lot of you have heard this statement, like, eat your colors. You get different nutrients from the different colored vegetables, different antioxidants, you know, stuff that's all good for you. And I want to talk a little bit about this combo of veggies here. So this combo, which is onion, celery, and green pepper, is known as the Holy Trinity in like Cajun Creole cuisine. And basically, it's kind of like a base for a lot of the dishes that are made, let me turn this down, in that region. And what I find interesting is a lot of different areas in the diaspora and in Africa have some combo of ingredients that are like very similar, that are a base for a lot of things. So for example, in West Africa, it's tomato, bell pepper, habanero, depending on how much heat you can handle, and onion. And then, for example, like Puerto Rican sofrito, so that's the peppers and the garlic and the onion and the herbs, and then like Caribbean green seasoning, which is used for a lot of marinades. So that's a lot of herbs, a lot of green peppers and things like that. And it's cool how food moved from Africa, you know, through unfortunate circumstances, but moved through Africa and kind of spread out. And the cooking methods pretty much stayed the same, but we were able to adapt to the different ingredients in the area and come up with like a variety of wonderful cuisines that all pair well with each other when you like have a Caribbean entree and then like a soul food side and then an African vegetable. So, you know, it all works together, and I think that's cool. So, all right, so we're gonna let the vegetables cook down a little bit, and they're starting to pick up some of the brown stuff, which it'll happen more when we add the chicken broth. And at this point, we're gonna add, so I've got a couple other seasonings here. I've got bay leaf, I've got thyme, and then I've got our blackening seasoning, which is similar to like a Cajun seasoning that you would buy at the store, like a Tony Chachere's or Paul Cordon or whatever. So, and this has very little salt in it as well, so it's safe to use in here if you're having issues with sodium. We're gonna add that. And you can also use this for a lot of other Creole dishes. It's the same seasoning that was used on the fish here. And all it was this, plus the Taste Tutor, and then cast iron. Okay. So, At this point, let's pretend we've cooked this for a while and the vegetables are translucent. We're gonna add our roux. Now, this is gonna help to thicken, oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna add tomatoes first. That's why it's not working. Okay. So, because tomatoes have a lot of acid, they work similar to like a white wine or a lemon juice or something if you were trying to deglaze the pan, which means just get all the brown stuff off. So once they start melting down and forming the sauce and all the outside cell structure starts to break down, it starts to release the acids and basically clean up the bottom of your pan. So I do the same method, like minus the meat, if I'm making like a marinara sauce. You just do your base vegetables. So I like onion, peppers, habaneros again, garlic, and then I put in just a bunch of chopped tomatoes and let it cook down for hours. Oh, I'm just talking about like a homemade marinara sauce or spaghetti sauce, yeah. Okay, so we've added tomatoes and the brown stuff is coming up pretty easily. So let's go ahead and add our roux. So this again is the chocolate roux, and I cooked this for I think like 50 minutes. It was about 50 minutes. It takes a while. You want to make sure you stir a lot because it can get pretty like burnt tasting if you go a little bit too far. But I like it just because it's the darker the roux, the more flavor you're gonna get. So I'm trying to go all the way, you know. So we're gonna add the roux, and it kind of works like when you add if you're making gravy and you're adding cornstarch or just the flour mixture that you use to thicken your gravy. You want to add that first and kind of break it up, and then very slowly add your liquid so you don't get lumps. And if you have a whisk, that works best, but it also works with a spoon if you work slowly enough. So we've added our roux, and you can see it's already darkened the vegetables quite a bit, and you get that nutty toasted flour meat flavor that's very customary of gumbo. So the roux's in there. Let's add our chicken broth. And you can use beef broth or vegetable broth or whatever. I just like to use chicken because I'm using chicken over here. So we're gonna slowly add. Sometimes I'm a little obnoxiously slow just because I really don't want it to be lumpy. So, and I kind of form a well in the center and incorporate everything. And I do the same method when I'm making mac and cheese, which is what you guys tasted today. I do butter and flour with sauteed vegetables, and then I go ahead and add the milk slowly.
There were vegetables in the mac and cheese?
So it was just onion and garlic. Okay, so let's turn this up a little bit. At this point, I would taste for salt, but because I've made this a couple times, I know it should be fine. And so I would have tasted at this point and made sure, it was fine with salt, seasoned, and then added other things, and so on and so forth. So we're gonna let this come to a boil. And when you're working with any sort of thickener, like flour or cornstarch or anything, you wanna make sure that it comes to a boil, because the boiling temperature is when the starches, they gelatinize basically, so they activate and they start to do the thickening. And then once it comes to a boil, you want to let it boil for at least a minute, because then you get rid of that starchy flavor sometimes that you have, and maybe that gritty flavor from like a lot of flour or a lot of cornstarch. So we're gonna let this come up to a boil. And we're almost done from here. Any questions? Yeah, so I made this roux last night. So it's perfectly fine to make your roux the day before. And I would even say it would be okay to freeze it. It would be okay to freeze it, like if you're making stuff at home. And this also freezes well, the gumbo recipe. So.
Did you go to cooking school or just self-taught?
I went to culinary school, but then I also learned a lot of the cultural stuff from my family because they don't really teach that. But just like the techniques and stuff, I went to Johnson and Wales, and it was basically classical French teaching, but then they throw in some other like American food stuff, like frying and breakfast and all those kinds of things. So it's pretty. Yeah, so I made a big batch of the roux, and I just use it for different things. So I used some of it for that big pot over there. I made some for Bible study on Wednesday, and then the rest of it I used for this little bit here. So, and it does cook down quite significantly. And also another thing about the dark roux, it'll darken as it cools. So if it's not really the color you're looking for, just wait for it to cool, it'll get there, and it should be fine. Yeah, so I printed out the recipe here for you guys all to have a copy of it. Okay. So it is starting to simmer a little bit. And obviously the longer you cook it, the more the flavors are going to melt. And especially since we're not using a lot of salt, you want to cook it for quite a bit just so that the salt from the sausage can seep into everything else. Slowly, so it will form like lumps. Yeah. So when you make your roux and you let it cool, it gets darker as it cools. So if the color isn't quite where you want it to be, you just let it cool some because you don't want to run the risk of letting it burn. So now at this point, we can add back our meat. Like so, and I usually let this part cook for at least 30 minutes if I'm in a rush, but it could be all day. So we'll go ahead and add our meat, and then, so the star of the show basically is the okra. So gumbo literally means okra. So, and okra is also really good for you. It has a ton of fiber, lots of healthy benefits, and it's one of my favorite vegetables, so I'm going to eat it a lot. And it's also native to West Africa. So we're going to go ahead and add the okra, and then the final traditional step would be to add some hot pepper sauce. I like Tabasco just because it's from Louisiana and it kind of fits with the whole vibe. So I'm going to use, and I use a lot because I like spicy. So I'm going to put that in there. And then one thing that I love once I've made something like a stew or a braised meat where like it's really rich and thick and it's cooked for a long time, I like to add back some freshness. So you can just do some raw veggies and toss it in at the end. I like to add just flat leaf Italian parsley because I like the flavor combination of that with all the vegetables in the gumbo. So we'll say like this cooked for hours. Once I'm ready to serve, I'm just going to dump the parsley in there, and then I will be ready to serve. So that's pretty much the recipe, and it was adapted from the 2 books that Linda mentioned, so a combo of those with some other added tips and tricks and stuff.